So I'm delighted to be here today with Will Buxton, who's agreed to spend some time answering questions that have been submitted by you guys, the members of F1 FanVoice. So we had over 1,200 questions submitted, and we've boiled it down to around about 30, and really looking forward to hearing your views, Will. So thank you very much for agreeing to take part.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Delighted to be here, obviously to get questions from the fans. Sorry for the 900 questions. No, more than that. See, my maths is still terrible.
1,200.
Yeah, but the amount you had to cut out. Hopefully, though, we'll get some insight into what we do and why we do it. And can't wait. Really can't wait.
Great, thanks. Well, we'll kick off with the first question, which is from Emma in the UK, who's asked, what is your very first Formula One memory?
Well, my first memory of motor racing is my parents took me to the Prescott Hill climb. And I can't have been more than, I think, 3 or 4. And I fell over a tent peg. You know, one of those really big tent pegs with like the edges all burred over, and I gashed my shin, and I've still got the scar in my shin. So motor racing literally physically affected me from the first time I ever saw it. The first memory of Formula One might even be before that. Sunday lunch round at my grandparents' house, and tiny little sort of smoke-filled dark room after lunch with my grandfather and my dad, and all the men sort of afterwards watching motor racing, and these red and white flashes underneath the trees of what must have been Hockenheim or Monza, and the McLarens, just the colour and the noise, and just sitting on my grandpa's knee watching it. So it was, that's my earliest memory of Formula One.
Wow, okay. And Aline from Switzerland has asked what you did before working in F1 and how you got to work in the awesome sport. So from being on your grandfather's knee
I worked in a
you
bar.
are now.
The job I had before I became an F1 journalist was barman. I was a good barman. I was a terrible waiter. It had been my dream since I was 13 to be an F1 journalist, because Senna died when I was 13, and my dad bought me my first copies of Autosport and Motoring News, and the words of the journalists in those publications really sort of soothed me and made me realise there were people out there that loved this same thing that I did, because the kids at school all liked football. And that's when I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be one of those people that could talk about this great thing that I loved. I went to university, studied politics, did my thesis on the politics of Formula One, got out of university. I had gone to an Autosport show and had met David Tremayne, who was one of the journalists I'd looked up to since I was really young. And he gave me a shot. He gave me a shot out of university. They needed somebody to help on the Formula One magazine, writing the news edit for the end of the year for the annual. And he gave me a shot, gave me like a 2-week work experience, and I never left. And 20 years later, I'm still here.
Here you are. Great stuff. And Donald from the USA, not that Donald, I presume, asks if you ever wished you'd become an F1 driver.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, what kid that loves Formula One doesn't want to become an F1 driver? I did a little bit of karting, not like proper professional karting or anything like that, just arrive and drive, fun stuff. First time I ever got in a go-kart. People of a certain age will remember Cadbury's did a competition. You had to get like 20 Cadbury wrappers, and you got a free 10-minute session at your local go-kart track. It was a Nigel Mansell sponsored thing to try and get people into karting. And I went and I did and I loved it. I totally loved it. And was kind of hooked at that point, but only ever just did it for fun. Never had the money, the resources, or crucially the talent to do it properly. And you know what they say, those who can do and those who can't talk about it. So I've talked about it for a long time. But no, I tried it actually 5 years ago now. I had my first experience racing single-seaters. And I say racing. I drove on the same piece of tarmac as Max Verstappen and Lance Stroll, who were making their debuts as well at the same time in single-seaters. And it gave me a very real understanding that I could never, in my wildest dreams, have done it, because they're just something else.
Yeah, I bet. And maybe you've just answered this question, but Chris from the US has asked if you could pick any job in the F1 circus, what would it be? So from driver, team principal, sporting director, journalist.
I love my job. I love doing what I do because it's something that I dreamt of since I was 13 years old, and I never thought I'd get to do it. So I consider myself very, very fortunate to do what I do, and I love it. Would I want to be, I mean, obviously, yeah, if I had the requisite skill, being a driver would be amazing. But stressful. Team boss, maybe, that'd be fun. President of the FIA. I don't know. Like I'd love. I studied politics for a long time. I've always loved politics and law, and I love the sport, and I love the decision making that goes into it, and plans for the future. I don't know if I could handle the team bosses and everything, but
great. And Daniel from the UK has asked if you ever see yourself moving back into commentary. He says that personally he thinks you are great on GP2 and would be great as a full-time commentator.
I'd love to. I'd love to. I adore commentary. It's a drug, you'll never be perfect. When you're broadcasting live, particularly with commentary, because it's so of the moment, you will never get it right. You will always mess something up, and that's what keeps you coming back, is that quest constantly to make it better, make it right, and you'll never get there, which is brilliant. For a broadcaster to constantly search for that perfection. And also just the thrill of it and the excitement and being in the moment. I had some of my most enjoyable times being a commentator. I do miss it. I do love it. There is a chance I'll be getting back behind the microphone a couple of times this year, actually. Don't know if I'm allowed to say that. Doing a few things and potentially going and doing a bit more of that next year. We did some commentary and testing at the start of the season, so we're seeing if we can actually expand that. Maybe I've given the game away and I'll get in trouble, but it wouldn't be anything new. So yeah, there's a chance it may come to pass.
Great.
Soon.
We'll keep our eyes peeled.
Yeah.
And Augustin from Argentina has asked, from outside it looks like a dream job, but what is the hardest part of your job, if there is one?
Family. And friends, maintaining that. The calendar when I started was 16 races, and I think 11 of those were in Europe. Mm-hmm. So the ever-expanding calendar is incredible for the sport and for all of us that get to travel with the circus and see these amazing parts of the world. But it is a long time away from home to maintain a family life and to make sure your friends don't forget what you look like is really, really hard. Because when you come home, all you want to do is sleep. That is tough. But look, I'm not going to complain. I've had an amazing 20 years in this game. But yeah, maintaining any semblance of a normal life is, and when you've got kids as well, it's hard. It's really, it is hard.
Yeah, exactly. And Michelle from Australia has asked, have you ever been starstruck or in awe in front of someone you've had to interview or ask a question to?
Yeah, Katy Perry. Yeah, mind-blowing. On the grid for the Singapore Grand Prix, I think one of the first Singapore Grand Prix, I think it would have been about, 10 years ago probably. And I was just, oh my God, it's Katy Perry. It blew my mind.
Did it show on camera?
Yeah, of course it did. I went to complete smush, and I was, I actually plucked up the courage to go and ask her some questions, but I was just a gibbering, doe-eyed wreck because I was just completely, it's Katy Perry. So I was like, that was pretty amazing. I remember I didn't have the guts to go and try and speak to Paul McCartney, who is just my god and idol, and I couldn't. I actually couldn't pluck up the courage to even attempt to ask his entourage if I could ask him a question on the grid. But Katy Perry, I did pluck up the courage and then became a gibbering wreck.
And Mattia from the US says, hello, Will, and thank you for your amazing work.
Hello, Mattia.
Have you ever had any friction or awkward moments with F1 drivers off camera that have made later interviews somewhat difficult?
Yes. Sometimes you'll ask a driver a question, they won't like it. Mm-hmm. I remember when things started getting needly between Perez and Ocon, I fired some pretty direct questions at both of them, which I don't think either one of them appreciated. But I talked it through with them, and we were good. Nico Rosberg and I had a very difficult relationship that stemmed all the way back to when I was GP2 press officer. And it was awkward at times. We've since kind of buried the hatchet, which has been really nice. And actually, one of the pieces of memorabilia I have at home that is one of my most sort of treasured pieces is a shirt that Nico signed me from back in GP2. But we had a really kind of up and down relationship. Fred Vasseur, incredibly as well, and I had a big falling out. And for about 10 years, we didn't really talk. And just recently, within the last sort of 3-4 seasons, again, we've buried the hatchet. And Fred is one of my very favourite people in the paddock, who I love to pieces and will make me laugh like a drain. But it's, when you spend 20 years around the same people, it's like boarding school, but constant, and traveling the world and being knackered at the same time. You're on top of each other for 25 weeks, including testing and everything else of the year. So you can't all get along all the time. You're going to fall out. You're going to rub someone up the wrong way. They're going to rub you up the wrong way. You've got to try and keep everybody on side doing the job that we do. But it's not always possible, and it's not easy because you're not always there to be their mate. You're not full stop there to be their mate. You're there to sometimes ask the difficult questions. And that's quite difficult, is getting that line right, of being open and amenable and friendly enough that, they know that you're not there to do them over, because you're not.
And our next question's from Jordan in Bulgaria, who says, "Congratulations for your book. I love it."
Thank you very much.
And is wondering who was the most inspiring and influential person in the paddock you've talked to. Wow. And why?
Over 20 years, there have been a lot of people. And a lot of them I got to talk to for my book. And that was, guys like Mario Andretti, or Dario Franchitti, or Sir Jackie Stewart, Niki Lauda, amazing racers with amazing tales to tell. Damon Hill is still, he was my hero as a kid. So even getting to talk to Damon, just sitting at a hotel and Damon will come and sit down and be like, hello mate, and we have a chat. I'm like, it's Damon Hill, that's kind of mad. And he's incredibly inspirational for me, for what he's meant in my life. But also the problems that he went through personally, the struggles that he dealt with, and the demons that he faced in his own life, and how he got past them, I found incredibly inspiring. I met last year, through what we do in F1, I met a chap called Drew Feustel, who is an astronaut who's been on the space station, just rocketing around Earth. And anyone who's had the sheer bravery to go up there and to see the world as we've never seen it, and just to listen to him talk was, that's just mind-blowing, isn't it? That's completely insane. A lovely chap called Sharaf, who comes to a lot of races, and we managed to organise to get him in the two-seater car, who's a blind Formula One fan, and talking to him about how he lost his sight, but how he adapted his life, and he found, continued his passions, but found a new way to enjoy his passions. Very similar to Alex Zanardi, who's one of the most amazing people, to utilise everything you have in your life. And if you lose something in life that you had taken for granted, for Alex it was his legs, for Sharaf it was his sight, the things that we all take for granted, to then find the passion, find the joy that remains, and make the most out of that, and actually to find a part of yourself that makes you even better than you were before. I find incredibly inspirational. It's knockout.
And James from the US has asked, out of all the interviews you've conducted over the years, which interview would you consider your favourite?
Katy Perry. No. That's hard. Been some great ones. From a personal perspective, I did an interview with Niki Lauda, and Niki didn't need to give interviews, and I don't think he really enjoyed doing them. And it wasn't the one for the book. It was we were talking about his accident. And, you know, he's been asked that question a billion times and gone over it a billion times. And we got to the end of the interview, and he leant across the table and he tapped my hand, and he sort of looked at me and went, he said, yeah, good interview, I went, like that. And I can't do a very good Nicky impression, but and my heart just went like, wow. And the fact that, you know, Nicky, he didn't really enjoy doing interviews, but the fact that he sort of patted my hand and thought it was an okay interview meant the world to me. So yeah, from a personal perspective, that one was great. But the one I'm super proud of is we did a sit down with Jules Bianchi, and given what happened very shortly after that, and the fact that Jules no longer with us, the fact that sits now on YouTube, completely unedited, just our conversation, means that, you know, if anybody ever wants to know who Jules was and what he loved and what drove him and what his passions were and the kind of guy that he was, you know, that's always going to exist now. And so I'm immensely proud that exists and that we got to do that, because it's a little bit of Jules that's still here.
And the next question from Serena in Canada is, what driver or team personnel do you enjoy chatting with the most during race weekends, and why?
I love Fred Vasseur because he's just hilarious. He's great. Sean Bratch is just a whirlwind, and is sensational. You only get 30 seconds to a couple of minutes because he's so like, boom, just the next thing, always doing something, but he's a joy to talk to, always just great fun. Ricciardo, Leclerc, a bunch of them, they're always such fun. And the great thing with Formula One is, you know, it might not even be just the big names and the people. The sport is littered with beautiful souls and wonderful people who, you know, we're all thrust into this bizarre circus together, and there's no guarantee that any of us would or should ever get on outside of it. But you do, and you get to meet these wonderful people who just have joyous spirits and are funny and caring and gracious and gregarious, and it's lovely. It's really wonderful. So, you know, I could reel off a list of names that people would never have heard of, and they make it fun and they make it worthwhile. And it's the people probably that you don't get to see that are the most fun to talk to.
Our next question is from Alison in the United States, who's asking, what was the most awkward or surprising answer to a question you've asked an F1 driver?
So it wasn't awkward, it was surprising. And I've had to think about this quite a lot to figure out which one it was. Michael Schumacher in Singapore last year, that he was with Mercedes, and his PR person, literally with an hour to go, just said, you can have 5 minutes with Michael. So I went to Twitter and I asked Twitter for some questions, not too dissimilar to this, actually. And the one that was amazing was, if you could go back and swap out some of the time that you've spent being a Formula One driver to spend more time with your family, would you do it? And I thought it was a great question. And the answer really surprised me, because he said no. And he said, because actually doing this job and being this successful and everything that's come with it has allowed me to spend so much more time with my family, to see them grow. And actually, when I compare the amount of time that I've been able to spend at home, regardless of the countless hours of testing and racing and everything else, and sponsor commitments, actually, I've spent more time watching my family grow and being with my family than almost anybody that I know outside of the sport. So no, I wouldn't do it differently, because doing what I do and being the successful and being Michael Schumacher has allowed me an incredible time with my family. And knowing now what would actually quite soon come to pass with Michael, that answer, I think, means all the more.
And from the most surprising answer to the craziest moment, so this is from Tiziana in Italy, what's the craziest moment that's ever happened to you in your career as a pit lane reporter or digital presenter?
That's a really tough one, because everything, like literally even having this job seems crazy to me, completely mad. I've been able to drive a Formula One car, nuts. I got to race single-seaters against Max Verstappen and Lance Stroll, mad. Who does that? But, some really nutty things. Craziest thing personally to me, though, was... it's so odd. It was at John Button's memorial service, and we spoke earlier, the questions about who have you been too nervous, or awkward to speak. I was always terrified about going to talk to Murray Walker, because Murray was Murray, and you're like, and I was so starstruck with Murray. I never had the guts to go and talk to him when we were in the paddock at the same time, and we were at John's memorial, and I said to James Allen, could you introduce me to Murray Walker? And he said, yeah, of course. So we went over to see Murray. And James said, Murray, I'd like to introduce Will Buxton. Will is a Formula One journalist. And as James was explaining, Murray turned around and said, yes, does the GP2 commentary. I know, James, I know. And introduced himself and said, lovely to meet you, Will. I really like what you do. And I was like, oh my God, Murray Walker knows who I am and he likes what I do. And so for that was, for me, the single craziest moment ever, really. But that's a very personal one, but it just blew my mind that Murray Walker knew who I was. It was amazing.
And Nicola from Wales has asked if you could interview any driver from the past, who would it be and why? Senna.
I mean, the whole reason I got into this, the whole reason I became an F1 fan, the whole reason I wanted to do the job that I do. I would have loved to have done that, to interview him, to meet him. I went to his home with Bruno Senna, and Bruno took me around and showed me around and the go-kart track, and it was wonderful. And I've, always felt this weird kind of connection because he was the whole reason I wanted to get into this. So, yeah, that'd be the dream.
And Farley from Brazil would like to know, what is your preparation process for a race weekend?
Listen, read, talk, find out as much as you can about everything that's going on. And that is the job, is to listen and to understand, and then to transfer that across in a way that is hopefully understandable. But my job is talking and listening. Doesn't sound too hard, actually, when you describe it like that. It's a lot more than that. It's not. Just make sure you're aware of everything, as aware as you can be. You're never going to be on top of everything. You're never going to understand everything, particularly not, for me anyway, the slightly more technical aspects of it. But so long as you understand what the base concepts and principles are, and why it's important and why it matters, that's really key.
Mm-hmm. And Nate from the US has asked, being on the ground for much of an F1 weekend, do you get more of a sense of inter-team issues than what is largely speculated about or inferred by the press?
Again, you're never going to be on top of everything. Mm-hmm. And it depends massively on your spheres of influence and who you hang out with as to what you hear. But again, the best thing you can do is talk to as many people as you can. If you talk to friends from Spain, they will have heard things from their Spanish contacts that are going on, and the Italians will have heard stuff from the Italians and French and everything like that, because everybody talks to different people. Mm. And then you start to piece it all together and the jigsaw starts to take shape. So yes, you do get a feel for it, but what comes out in the press is a result of those same conversations. Very rarely will somebody come up to you and go, ooh, guess what? It's about hearing a little suggestion of something, which then you talk to somebody else, and the flesh starts to get put on the bones, and all of a sudden, this thing starts to emerge. And then it comes out in the press. It's never, very rarely do you read anything that's just a hunch.
Mm-hmm. And Thomas from the Netherlands would like to know what your favourite track is to go to.
I get asked that a lot, and it's tough because it's like, well, do you mean the best track to watch a race at? Do you mean the best facilities? Do you mean the best city? Because it's so different. I love Budapest. City's amazing. Weather's usually great. Track's fantastic because you can see as a fan your vantage points give you so many different views on different corners because it's in a natural bowl. Singapore, again, brilliant city, great event. Cars look superb under the lights. Japan, bonkers, great track. I mean, we're spoiled for choice, really. Anytime you get to see a Formula One car in the flesh, trackside at Monaco, if you ever get frustrated and annoyed or ground down, oh, I've been doing this for 20 years, I don't know if I can carry on doing it, go and stand trackside at Monaco, bang, straight back in, like, this is the best thing in the world.
And Jay from the US has asked, what was the biggest challenge you've faced in your career?
Self-belief has been really hard because I don't think I've ever really sort of deserved anything that's come my way. And in the social media age as well, to be constantly sort of kicked and told that you're crap is really hard. So that's difficult. And, you know, I've been, what a lot of people probably don't realize, I've been a freelancer for 15 years. And that's really hard, is when you go into the winter not knowing if you've still got a job the next year as well. It's difficult. It's part of the buzz. You know, it's exciting, but it's terrifying as well. That, allied to what we talked about earlier, of maintaining your family and your friendships, I think has been the biggest challenge.
Mm-hmm. And kind of in light of that, Ben from the UK has asked, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to an aspiring journalist in F1? Find your voice and don't stray from it, because you are unique. So never try to be somebody else. Never try to sound like somebody else or write like somebody else. Find your voice and use your voice and keep it. And keep the passion and always be passionate. Those two things, being yourself and being passionate, will get you a long way. We've got a few questions now about the future of Formula One. Okay. Austin from the US has asked whether you think the 2021 changes to F1 will make driving more competitive and enjoyable to watch. That's the plan. Let's wait and see if they come to pass. There's been so much work put into them that I hope they do. Cars look great. The figures coming out look great. And if everything comes to pass, it should be phenomenal. Obviously, the longer you keep a set of regulations in place, the more everyone eventually comes together, because you make great strides within the early years of a new set of regulations. And eventually, you know, the big teams take those big steps and the other team's going to take smaller steps. But eventually, the big teams can only make those incremental gains towards the top. And the other teams are then catching up as time goes on. And so the parity starts to come over, you know, the longer the period, the lines eventually all come together. So yes, immediately it may look scary and it may be worrying, because obviously, you know, those with the more money might be able to take those advantages, and so staying with the older regulations might make more sense. But the plan, the reason for the 2021 regulations, I think is solid. The amount of work that's gone into it is huge. And over time then, if those regulations remain stable, we'll get to that point of everybody coming together, and it'll be fantastic. And Craig from England has asked, between McLaren and Renault, who do you think is best placed to challenge the big three teams when those new regulations do come in? Right now, McLaren look amazing. The steps they've taken, the advances they've made in the last 12 to 18 months have been astonishing. I think they've got the right management structure in place. They've brought in the right people. You know, yes, Renault is a factory outfit, but you look at, you know, McLaren are a big player, always have been. And with everything now focused and channeled, and looking on the evidence of this year, McLaren look to be swinging back so strong. And Manu from Belgium would like to know, as an F1 specialist, what changes would you recommend in order to make F1 even better than it is now? Reduce practice. Take away practice. Not all of it, just some of it. You know, the weekends where we get disrupted practice sessions and the guys don't go out too much on the Friday, and then they've got limited time to understand the cars, usually means there's less of a handle, there's more opportunity for something to
kind of goes sideways. The teams have so much data to pore over that, by the time they get into the race, the strategies have already been figured out. Everything is done, by the number, and there's very little deviation. Very often, the strategist will know by the time the checkered flag goes out, if they find themselves in X position by the end of lap 1, that their projected race finish will be Y. How do you remove that inevitability? Only by reducing the amount of data they have to be able to make those projections. And the only way to reduce the amount of data is to reduce the amount of practice time. So that's what I would do. I'd cut down practice time. We're already looking at regulations that cut down the amount of aero and bring the cars. They're not making them spec cars like a Formula 2 or an Indy car or anything like that, but certainly restrict the freedom that the teams have within those areas. Maybe a couple of standardized parts that have the most effect on dirty air. Just reduce the amount of data the teams have at their disposal by reducing practice time. That's what I'd do. But I don't run the show.
Tyra from the USA has asked what you think about the reverse grid idea.
Love it. And I've been banging on about it for 5 years, if not longer, because we came up with this idea in Bahrain, bunch of journalists, couple of bottles of red wine. What would we do to fix F1? And we said, look, so first of all, question 1, what makes an exciting race? And the answer is a jumbled up grid. Okay, fine. So that's what you need for an exciting race. What creates that? So a wet qualifying session, someone's engine going, those kind of things. Now you can't falsely create a wet track or throw a sprinkler. That's gimmicky as false. How do you get a jumbled up grid? And we started to think back to karting and heat races. I thought, okay, how do you turn like a karting world championships with heats? How do you turn that into Formula One? And the easiest solution we came up with was a reverse grid race on the Saturday in place of qualifying. Grid being set with reverse championship order. So as things stand now, you'd have the 2 Williamses on the front row, then all the way to Lewis and Valtteri on the back row. Now the idea we had at that time was you then did a 20-lap elimination race, where at the end of each lap, the driver in last place is eliminated, thus setting their place on the grid. So the driver who comes around at the end of lap 1 in 20th place, you're out, you start 20th. Then next lap, 19th place is set, all the way through to last lap of the race. There's one driver left. It's his tour of glory, and he crosses the line and he's got pole position. Maybe a little bit too cutthroat. But the theory is sound for 2 reasons. 1, you will get a jumbled up grid. You're not going to have the 2 Mercedes drivers starting 19th and 20th on the grid. You're likely, after, let's say, a 100-kilometer race, to have them in or on the cusp of the top 10. So you'll still get that jumbled up grid, which at the end of the hour and a half on Sunday, they're still going to be fighting for the podium, if not the win. Because we've seen Germany this year, Vettel, same with Hamilton, coming from 18th, 19th, 20th, still placing on the podium. So the chances are still high that they'll be there. The other thing is you have to start designing cars that can overtake, where the priority is on being able to follow, being able to pass. Not about keeping cars behind, but on passing. And all of those things added together make for a better race on Sunday. Also, the qualifying race with a reverse grid means that on a Saturday afternoon, Williams, Alfa Romeo, Racing Point, whoever it might be, they're going to get the majority of the TV time. It's better for their sponsors. They're getting much more TV time, so they'll get potential for more revenue coming in for the teams. That's giving them more money to be able to compete with the big guys. I don't see a downside to it, other than, you can't change the DNA of the sport. DNA by its nature changes. That's how evolution occurs. So, DNA doesn't change argument is rubbish.
And Dylan from Italy has asked, who's the emerging driver who excites you the most?
Juju Noda, who is still not old enough to compete. She's the daughter of Hideki Noda. Everything we've seen from her age 10, 11, 12 suggests she's ridiculously good, genuinely ridiculously good. We don't know. We just don't know whether, competing internationally she will be, or even if her trajectory will continue as it looks to be, but we're all looking for, you know, the woman that will break the mold, that will set the world on fire and come and compete with the boys and kick their butts, you know. And looking at the videos and the times she's setting, she just looks amazing. So who knows? But you know, it's not. She won't be 15 until 2021. But God, I want to see her race. I want to see her compete. I want to see whether the hype is real. That's genuinely, that's the racer I'm most excited about for the future.
Great. And a couple of questions into one here. Adita from Poland has asked, why have you stopped making Haas jokes in paddock cars? And Dwayne from Australia wants to know if you've been working on any more.
No, like I set myself up for a fall with that. Did it once, then got a couple of tweets, and there was like a thread somewhere going, is he going to make a thing of this? And I thought, yeah, why not? I'll make a thing of it. And then 10 races in, I'm like, what have I done? I can't keep doing this. Somehow got it going for the rest of the year, and then went, that's it. That's that. I can't do any more. So yeah, you know, it's like Faulty Towers. They made 12 episodes and then that's it. Don't overdo a good thing. It was fun while it lasted. It was a pain in the butt towards the end, but we did it, made it work, and then, you know, find something new.
It would be remiss of me not to ask the very last question then from Vince in the US, which is, what has your favourite thing been about working for F1 in all the years covering races?
Not the Haas puns. What's been the favourite? My favourite thing has been getting paid to do something that I love. It's not even about getting paid to do it. It's about just being unbelievably fortunate that someone allowed me to come and spend time with my heroes and watch this thing I love evolve and grow from the inside. It's been an honor. I've loved it, every second of it. You know, who honestly gets to do this? It's mad. And the crazy, you know, maybe going back to one of the questions earlier, you know, what's the craziest thing that happened to you in your career? The craziest thing for me is that I've even had a career doing this, that I've got to write about it, that I got to talk about it, that I got to commentate. I got to do these things where I was terrified about meeting Murray Walker because Murray was Formula One. I never thought I'd get to do what Murray did. And it's just been mad. I've loved every second of it.
Great. Well, thanks so much. It's been a really interesting session.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure the fans will love it.
Well,
so thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. It's been great. Been really, really fun. We've loved it.
Great. Thank you.